He punched a nurse right in the middle of the emergency room. The blow came out of nowhere. People screamed. A tray of scalpels hit the floor, but what looked like violence was actually heartbreak, and it all started with a smell no one could forget. This isn't just a medical case. It's a story about shame, silence, and the fragile threads that hold families together. I'm Dr. Late Life, and if stories like this speak to something in you, hit subscribe. Let's keep telling the ones no one else dares to say out loud. It happened just past midnight, under the white humming lights of St. Gabriel Hospital's emergency room. Outside, the rain fell in sheets, splattering against glass like anxious fingers tapping to get in. Inside, it was chaos, though organized, the kind of frantic rhythm only an ER could maintain. A 6-car collision had filled 3 trauma bays and most of the hall. Alarms were beeping, nurses calling out vitals, doctors moving fast but precise, and among it all, a man lay still on a gurney. He was old, thin, bruised. Blood from a gash on his forehead had dried in a line that ran down his cheek like a cracked riverbed. A ventilator hissed next to him. Machines bleeped softly. His eyes were closed, his body unmoving. But none of that is what people remembered most. It was the smell. It hit first as a question mark in the air. Something off, something not right. Then it grew stronger. Sour, acrid, thick. It clung to your nose, to your throat, to your thoughts. One nurse gagged quietly behind her mask. A young intern muttered something under his breath, then louder. Jesus, that smell, like a dead raccoon. Did someone leave a body in his mouth? Thomas heard that. He had just returned from the vending machine, coffee in one hand, adrenaline holding up the other. His flight from Chicago had landed late, and his phone had buzzed the moment he touched down. Dad's in the hospital. It's bad. The words echoed in his skull like a siren, steady and shrill. He hadn't seen his father in 5 years. The last memory he had was of his dad standing in the doorway, arms stiff, jaw locked, eyes saying something his mouth never did. Thomas had walked away. And now here he was, thrown into an emergency room that reeked of antiseptic, fear, and something worse. That smell. He didn't understand it at first. He thought maybe it was the blood, or the wounds, or the room. But then he heard the joke, heard the laughter, heard the disgust. He saw red. The coffee hit the floor before the punch did. A second later, the intern did too. The sound was sickening. A thud followed by gasps, instruments clattering, a tray crashing down in the background. A nurse screamed. A guard started to move. For a full 2 seconds, the room froze. Dr. Miles moved quickly. Years of experience had taught him the signs, not just of cardiac arrest or septic shock, but of the moment something broke in a human being. He grabbed Thomas by the shoulders, firm but not violent. Hey, look at me. Come with me now. Thomas resisted for half a second, breathing hard, eyes wild. Then something in him crumpled. He let the doctor guide him down the hallway, past staring faces, down into one of the unused family consult rooms. The walls were off-white, the chairs uncomfortable. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead was too loud. Thomas sat, his shoulders slumped like a bridge collapsing. His hand was still trembling. He stared at his knuckles, now red and swollen. The rage drained quickly, leaving something heavier behind, something far more dangerous. Grief. I'm not crazy, he muttered. I didn't say you were, Dr. Miles replied gently. He moved to the small sink in the corner, poured a glass of water, and handed it over. Thomas drank. Too fast. Some of it spilled down his chin. He's my father, he said, quieter now, I know. No, I mean, he's not just some guy. He built houses with his bare hands. He used to lift me onto his shoulders to see parades. He fought in a war. He coached Little League even when he didn't know the rules. Miles nodded. Let him speak. And now, people are laughing because of the way he smells. There it was, not violence, not aggression, not mental illness, just heartbreak, compressed, boiled, leaking out through his fists because it had nowhere else to go. Dr. Miles leaned back in his chair, hands clasped loosely. He didn't speak right away. That silence, measured calm, was not avoidance. It was space. Space for Thomas to sit inside his own storm. Thomas rubbed his face with both hands. The skin beneath his eyes looked stretched, worn. I haven't seen him in 5 years, he said finally. I didn't even call last Christmas. Not even a text. Why not? Miles asked. Thomas stared at the floor. Because it always smelled. Him, his breath, his clothes, his truck, everything. I used to think it was just cigarettes, or maybe something rotting in his teeth. But then I started avoiding dinners. Then birthdays. Then. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Miles nodded again. I understand. I've seen this before. Thomas blinked, surprised. You have? Yes. Not often. But enough. The doctor's voice was calm. Your father has what we call chronic tonsillolithiasis. Tonsil stones. Over time, bits of food, dead cells, and bacteria get trapped in the folds of the tonsils. They calcify. They harden. And they stink. Thomas's brow furrowed. You're telling me all of this is from tonsil stones? I know how it sounds. Silly. Ridiculous even. But yes, I've seen older patients with stones the size of sunflower seeds embedded in their throats. They often live alone. No one notices. No one checks. And the smell, well, you've experienced it. Thomas leaned back, eyes closed. So it wasn't decay, or cancer, or anything fatal? Not directly, but chronic infections can wear a body down. And isolation? That can kill you in other ways. Silence again. Thomas opened his eyes slowly. I used to sit in the car with the windows cracked open, even in winter. I couldn't stand it. I didn't tell him. I just moved farther away. Every year. He looked up. He probably knew. Yes, Miles said. He probably did. Thomas's voice was hoarse. Why didn't he say anything? Dr. Miles sighed. Pride, maybe. Shame. Maybe he didn't know what it was either. Or maybe he did, and decided the silence hurt less than the embarrassment. The words hung in the room like smoke. Thomas suddenly remembered the last Thanksgiving they'd shared. His father had cooked. The kitchen smelled like burnt onions and too much garlic. Thomas had forced smiles, left early. That night he drove home with the windows down despite the cold. He hadn't returned since. I punched that kid, Thomas muttered, the guilt creeping back. I'll speak with him, Miles said. He'll be okay. Broken nose, bruised ego. But he'll be fine. Thomas almost smiled. Almost. I don't want people laughing at him, he said. I know I did too, in my own way. But not anymore. Miles studied him. It's not about the punch, Thomas. It's about what you do now, after. Thomas nodded. Slowly, a man just beginning to understand the weight he carried. Miles stood. Go wash your hands. Get a fresh shirt if you have one. When you're ready, come see him. Not as someone broken, just as his son. Thomas sat still for a long moment. Then he stood. Before he left the room, he turned back. How do you know all this? About the stones, the shame, the silence. Dr. Miles looked away briefly, his voice softer now. Because my mother died before I ever asked her why she stopped singing. Thomas didn't say anything. He just nodded. Sometimes grief doesn't speak in screams. It whispers, through smells, through distance, through time lost and never recovered. Outside, the rain kept falling. He used to love the way his father's hands looked. Big, weathered, with thick knuckles and veins like ropes. When Thomas was small, those hands seemed capable of anything. Holding him steady on a bike, carrying lumber, across muddy yards, flipping pancakes in a scratched pan that had survived more decades than most marriages. In those early years, Everett had been a man of quiet gestures. Not one for hugs or long talks, but a constant presence. There at every Little League game, every scraped knee, every broken toy. He fixed things. That's what he did. He didn't explain his love. He nailed it down, tightened it, welded it into place. But then his mother died. It was sudden, a stroke. One minute she was laughing at a joke on the porch, the next she was on the floor, Thomas screaming as Everett pounded her chest, calling her name. The hospital said she never regained consciousness. Thomas was 15. After that, something inside his father quieted even more. Not just in voice, but in spirit. The man who used to hum old country songs while fixing the water heater stopped making noise altogether. He still showed up, still cooked, still paid bills. But his eyes turned inward. His hands, once so steady, started to tremble faintly when he thought no one was looking. And then the smell started. At first it was just a hint. Something odd during dinner. Thomas remembered pushing his plate back one night, claiming he wasn't hungry, though the lasagna was his favorite. His father said nothing, just cleared the table. Then came the car rides, that old Ford pickup with the cloth seats soaked in decades of sweat, engine grease, and smoke. But underneath all of that, something else, something rank. It clung to the air when his father spoke, when he yawned, when he laughed. Thomas tried not to flinch. He rolled down windows, held his breath. He told himself it was just old man smell. Maybe it was the truck, but it followed his father inside the house, into the living room, the kitchen, even into the silence. He tried once, casually, to mention it. "Hey, maybe you should see a dentist," Thomas had said, pouring coffee one morning when he was home from college. Everett had looked up from the newspaper. "Why?" "I don't know. Just general checkup. It's been a while, right?" His father's jaw tightened, just a little. "I'm fine." And that was the end of that. After college, Thomas moved to Chicago. He said it was for work, and it was, but also, it was for air, for distance, for the relief of not holding his breath at the dinner table. He called less and less. Birthdays became text messages. Holidays became guilt. And every time he considered booking a flight home, he imagined that smell, that heavy, sour breath thick in the air between them. He couldn't bring himself to face it. Then came the last time, Thanksgiving 5 years ago. He had flown in, stayed for one night. His father had made stuffing from scratch, just like his wife used to. The table was set with their old wedding china. There was even cranberry sauce, the kind Thomas hated as a kid but Everett insisted on every year anyway. They sat down. The TV was on low in the background. Everett raised a toast, said, "To family, what's left of it." Thomas took a bite, then pushed his plate slightly away. He felt it again, that smell. And this time, it wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It carried weight now, years of distance, resentment, unspoken words. "I can't do this," he had said. Everett looked up. "Do what? This whole thing, the pretending, the silence, the—" He paused, then said it. "The smell." Everett didn't react, not right away. He just stared at his son. A long, unreadable stare. Then he stood up, walked into the kitchen, and started washing dishes. No yelling, no asking him to stay, no guilt trip, just the sound of water running, and plates clinking. Thomas left the next morning. He had told himself it was the right thing to do. He wasn't helping by staying. He wasn't comfortable. The silence between them wasn't just awkward anymore. It felt toxic, like mold growing in the drywall of an old house, unseen but inevitable. He packed his bag with mechanical movements, brushed his teeth while avoiding the mirror, and wrote a note he never left. The flight back to Chicago was quiet. He read nothing, slept barely, and when he got home, he dropped his duffel bag in the hallway and stood, in the dark for a full 10 minutes before taking off his shoes. He told himself he'd call. He told himself he just needed space, that his father probably didn't even notice he was gone, that they were two grown men who'd grown apart. It happened all the time. But the image wouldn't leave him. Everett, standing at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water, staring out the small kitchen window. Not speaking, not turning around, just continuing. Like Thomas walking away didn't require a response, like he had expected it all along. What haunted Thomas most was that there was no fight, no outburst, not even a sigh, just resignation. He hadn't known that would be the last time. The years passed, work piled up. Promotions came and went. He moved apartments twice, started dating a woman who eventually became his wife. They talked once about flying out to see his dad, but he made excuses. "He's probably busy. We don't talk much. It'll be weird." He never told her the real reason, that he couldn't face that look again. The one his father gave him that night, the kind that wasn't angry or sad, just empty, the kind that said, "I knew you'd leave." He sent birthday cards, sometimes with gift cards inside, unsigned. He liked to imagine Everett smiling when he got them. Maybe going out for lunch, maybe not. He never asked. Holidays were harder. The guilt always arrived around the same time as the snow. He'd open the fridge and see leftover pie, and think of the one his dad used to burn every Thanksgiving. He'd hear a football game in the background and picture the old man falling asleep on the recliner, snoring softly. He'd feel the phone buzzing in his pocket and not answer it, just in case it was him. And every now and then, in crowded subways or old diners, he'd smell it. That same scent, faint, fleeting, like a ghost of something rotting beneath the surface. It would freeze him in place just for a second, long enough to remember. long enough to feel it again. The weight of not asking, the shame of avoiding, the silence. But life didn't stop. It never does. The deadlines kept coming. The meetings, the bills, the weddings, the funerals, other people's, thankfully. And then, that night, the call came. Unfamiliar number, familiar fear. Are you the emergency contact for Everett Thomas? He had forgotten he still was. Yes. There's been an accident. He's at St. Gabriel in critical condition. We suggest you come as soon as possible. He had asked no questions. Booked the flight, left a note for his wife. Slept only on the plane, if that could be called sleep. His dreams were brittle and dark. By the time he reached the hospital, his legs ached from travel and regret. He remembered walking through his childhood home on that last morning, suitcase in hand. The hallway smelled like dust and old wood. The door creaked the same way it always had. As he stepped out onto the porch, he paused, just for a moment, and turned back. His father stood inside, in the shadow of the front door, not following him, not waving goodbye, just standing, one hand on the frame, one foot barely forward, like he had considered stepping out, saying something, but didn't. Thomas remembered the look on his face. Not angry, not sad, just tired, like a man who had watched too many people walk away and decided, somewhere deep inside, not to chase them anymore. And the door closed without a sound. The house hadn't changed. That was the first thing Thomas noticed as he stepped out of the car and onto the cracked sidewalk in front of the old place. Same peeling paint on the porch rails. Same crooked mailbox with the rusted flag permanently stuck halfway up. Even the wind chime, faded and missing 2 tubes, still clinked faintly, in the morning breeze like it was remembering a song it used to know. He stood there for a minute, holding the spare key that had been hidden under the flower pot since the Clinton administration. The neighborhood felt quieter than he remembered. Smaller, not as alive. Or maybe it was just him. Across the street, the door to a yellow house opened. Rachel appeared, wrapped in a knitted shawl and holding a coffee mug with both hands. Thomas? He looked up, blinking like he'd been caught trespassing. "Hi, Miss Rachel," he said, voice dry from the chill. She walked down her front steps with surprising speed for a woman her age. Her silver hair was tied up in a loose bun, and her eyes had the familiar weight of someone who had lived too long near someone else's silence. "I was wondering if you'd show up," she said, handing him the coffee without asking. He took it automatically. It was still warm. How is he? Thomas hesitated. Alive, for now. Sedated. They don't know when, or if, he'll wake up. Rachel nodded slowly, lips pressed together. "That man," she muttered. Stubborn as a mule, but he kept on. She looked toward the house. He used to sit on that porch every Sunday morning. Same chair, same flannel, just sitting, watching nothing. Thomas followed her gaze. The porch chair was still there, dusty, one leg slightly shorter than the rest. "Did he talk to you?" he asked. Rachel chuckled softly, then sighed. "Talk? Everett? You know better than that." He'd grunt sometimes, nod. "Once he offered to fix my fence, even though I didn't ask." That sounds like him. He was lonelier than he let on. Thomas didn't answer. He didn't have to. Rachel looked back at him, squinting in the early sun. "He kept your Christmas lights up." Thomas turned. "What?" "They're still in the box, up in the attic." Every year he'd go up there and take them down, sit on the porch with them, but he never hung them, just held them. Thomas swallowed hard. Rachel stepped closer and put a hand on his arm. "He wasn't good at words, your father, but I think he was always waiting. For you." She didn't say it with judgment, just fact. "I should go in," Thomas murmured. Rachel nodded. "If you need anything, you know where I am." He climbed the porch steps slowly, like the house might collapse if he moved too fast. The key turned easily in the lock, too easily. The door creaked open, and he stepped inside. The air inside was cold, stale. It smelled like dust, old paper, and something else, metallic almost, like the inside of an unopened drawer. Everything was exactly where it used to be. The worn recliner facing the TV, the faded rug his mother had picked out in the late 80s. Family photos on the shelf, him in Little League, his parents on their wedding day, a black and white photo of Everett in uniform. But there was no noise, no TV, no humming refrigerator, no music, just nothing. He moved slowly, touching things he didn't remember missing. The edge of the coffee table, the remote control still held together with duct tape, a pencil cup with dried-up pens and one old receipt sticking out. Then he saw it, on the kitchen counter, a coffee mug, half full, still fresh, like someone had just been there. Thomas stared at the mug for a long moment. The coffee had a thin layer of oil on top, barely cooled, as if his father had taken a sip just before the accident. That was the strange part. This place didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. He stepped further into the kitchen. On the table sat a spiral-bound notebook filled with crooked handwriting and grocery lists written in block letters. Bananas, cough drops, cat food. He didn't even own a cat. Then he noticed the small black device mounted high in the corner of the living room. A security camera, blinking red. Thomas frowned. Everett never trusted tech. He barely knew how to text. But there it was, recording silently. He followed the cable to an old monitor tucked away in the hallway closet, an odd place to hide a viewing screen. The monitor was dusty, but the light was on. He tapped the keyboard, and the screen flickered to life. Playback. Archive folder, dates listed in file names. Thomas hesitated, then clicked on a clip labeled just 3 days ago. The feed loaded. There, on the couch, sat his father. Alone. He was dressed in his flannel shirt, the same one he wore every winter since Thomas was a kid. His hands rested on his knees. He wasn't watching TV. The screen was off. He was just sitting, staring at the empty recliner across from him, the one his wife used to sit in. A full minute passed on screen, Everett unmoving. Then, without looking away from the chair, he said, "I found the photo album today. The one from the lake trip. You remember that?" Silence. He chuckled once, the sound low and hoarse. Tommy fell in trying to catch frogs. God, he screamed like the water was lava. Thomas felt his throat tighten. The man on the screen shifted slightly. I should have told him that day that I was proud. He built that damn raft out of milk jugs and duct tape, floated halfway across the lake before it sank. Pause. I think that was the last time he smiled at me without pulling away. Thomas fast-forwarded through the next clip. Same day, later in the afternoon. This time, Everett sat at the kitchen table with 2 plates, one full, one untouched. He poured water into 2 glasses, laid out 2 napkins. Then he ate, quietly, methodically. Halfway through the meal, he looked up and muttered, "If you'd just asked, I would have told you." He didn't elaborate, didn't explain. The timestamp ticked forward. The next clip, yesterday morning, Everett stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. He was holding a shirt, Thomas's old college sweatshirt, the one he left behind. "I kept this for you," he said. No one responded. But he kept talking. "I wore it when I missed you, like it kept the memory warm." Thomas's hands clenched. He clicked through one final clip. Late last night, just hours before the accident, Everett sat again in the dark living room. The lights were off. Rain tapped gently against the windows. "Maybe I smelled bad," he whispered. "Maybe I talked too little, or too late." His voice cracked. But I waited. Every damn day, I waited. The feed cut off. Thomas sat there, frozen, the monitor's glow painting his face in blue. He had come back expecting guilt, yes, maybe regret. But not this, not the echo chamber of a man's private ache, recorded and stored, away like the one conversation he was never brave enough to have. He closed the file, shut off the screen. The house behind him was quiet again. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by everything left unsaid. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and warmed over coffee. Thomas sat in the consultation room again. Same chair, same flickering ceiling light, same ache sitting squarely in his chest. Dr. Miles stood by the whiteboard, arms crossed, eyes focused not on charts or monitors, but on him. "How much do you know about the tonsils?" the doctor asked. Thomas blinked. Not much. They're somewhere in the back?" Miles nodded. "In the throat. Part of the lymphatic system. Most people don't think about them unless they get inflamed." Thomas gave a tired shrug. "What do they have to do with all this?" Miles picked up a marker and drew 2 crude ovals near a throat sketch. "This is where tonsil stones form. Bits of food, mucus, bacteria, tiny debris get caught in the crypts, the little pockets of the tonsils. In most people, it clears out on its own. But in others, especially older adults, it hardens." He turned to face Thomas fully. "They calcify, sometimes for years, and they rot." Thomas leaned back slowly, like the air had just shifted. "That's the smell?" Miles nodded. One of the worst we encounter, actually. It's not like bad breath from garlic or cigarettes. It's deeper, sour, putrid, like something dying, but slowly. Thomas exhaled, a mix of disbelief and guilt rising in his throat. I thought, I don't know, that it was just him, being careless, letting himself go. Miles didn't rush to comfort him. He let the words hang there, dense and heavy. It's common, he said eventually. When people live alone, these things get missed. They don't notice the smell, or they do, and they think it's just age. No one's close enough to tell them, or worse, no one's close enough to care. Thomas looked away. I thought he didn't care either, he murmured. I thought he didn't notice me pulling away. I figured if he did, he would have said something. But he just let me go. That's what you saw, Miles said. But what did he see? Thomas turned back. What do you mean? He may have seen you growing uncomfortable, heard the silence, felt it, and maybe instead of confronting it, he accepted it. Not because he didn't love you, but because shame does strange things to people, especially men of his generation. Thomas swallowed hard. Miles stepped closer, lowered his voice. There's a thing I've noticed. In the very old, especially those who've lost spouses or lived alone a long time, they carry things, embarrassments, smells, infections, secrets, and they don't speak of them, because somewhere along the way, they started believing that discomfort is easier than vulnerability. Thomas clenched his jaw. I hated that smell. God, I hated it. I believe you, Miles said gently. I rolled down the window even in December. I made excuses to leave early. I sat on the edge of the couch so I wouldn't have to lean in. And he noticed, Miles said. Thomas nodded. Yeah, he noticed. He remembered a birthday dinner. His father had tried to talk, asked about work, about the new apartment. But Thomas had kept the conversation short, half answers only, distracted. Because the whole time, all he could think about was that unbearable stench in the air. I just thought if it bothered me enough, he'd do something about it, Thomas said. See a dentist, brush more. I thought it was his fault. It wasn't about fault, Miles said. It was about being alone, and no one noticing what needed to be seen. Thomas sat in silence, head bowed, thumbs pressed together like a child caught in confession. The room felt smaller now, warmer, like the air was thick with everything he hadn't said over the years. I kept waiting for him to change, he said quietly. To apologize, to fix it. He laughed once, dry, bitter. But it wasn't him who needed to change, was it? Miles didn't answer. Some things were better left hanging. I used to tell people we weren't close, Thomas continued, that he was distant, cold. But the truth is, I never tried, not really. I just took the out he gave me. The doctor stepped back, leaning against the countertop. People think love is in what we say, or do, or give. But sometimes love is simply in the act of staying close, even when something smells, even when it's uncomfortable. Thomas nodded slowly. His voice broke. I didn't stay. For a long time there was only the sound of the wall clock ticking, 1 second after another, unforgiving. You know, Thomas said finally, when I was little, he used to fix everything. Bikes, radios, toys, my mom's old garden hose. If something broke, he was there, patching it, taping it, hammering it back into place. Miles tilted his head. Sounds like he knew how to hold things together. Yeah, but maybe no one ever taught him how to hold people. The line sat between them, honest and painful. Thomas wiped at his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. I thought I had time, time to come back, to visit, to fix things when it wasn't so awkward. But the longer I stayed away, the heavier it got. And now, he trailed off. Now, his father was hooked to machines. Now the man who raised him couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't say, "It's okay, son." Now, all he had were memories of half conversations, awkward silences, and the smell that had driven them apart. Miles checked his watch. They'll be ready in about an hour. We're going to do the removal under local anesthesia. Not risky, but it won't be pleasant. Thomas straightened up. Can I be there? The doctor paused, surprised. Are you sure? Most family members prefer to wait outside. I waited outside for 5 years, Thomas said, his voice steady now. I'm done with that. Miles nodded, something respectful in his expression. All right, I'll let the nurses know. Thomas stood and followed him into the hallway. The buzz of fluorescent lights, the beeping monitors, the slow rhythm of hospital life. It all felt different now. Less like background noise, more like a symphony of lives converging in moments of crisis and healing. They passed the nurse's station. A few staff members looked up. Some nodded. One, the intern Thomas had punched, flinched slightly but said nothing. There was a strip of gauze across his nose. Thomas paused, walked over. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. The intern blinked, caught off guard. Okay. I shouldn't have hit you. A beat." "It's all right," the intern said eventually, though his tone still held a trace of caution. "I shouldn't have joked." Thomas nodded and moved on. Small repairs, one at a time. They reached the prep room just outside ICU. Through the window he saw his father, pale, still, tubes in his mouth and chest rising and falling in artificial rhythm. A nurse approached with gloves, a hair cover, and a gown. "You don't have to scrub in," she said softly, "but this will let you stand nearby." Thomas took the gear without hesitation. He didn't flinch at the sterile smell. He didn't pull away from the sight of his father's bruised face. For the first time in years he leaned in. He looked at the man lying there and whispered, "I'm here, not as a doctor, not as a visitor, as a son." And for the first time in a long time he didn't turn away. The room was colder than Thomas expected. Not freezing, but sterile. Like it had been drained of everything human so only procedure could remain. Overhead, a light buzzed faintly. Nurses moved in quiet rhythm, checking monitors, laying out instruments on a tray lined with blue surgical cloth. Mr. Everett lay motionless, mouth slightly open, a soft hiss of oxygen escaping from the side of the cannula. His eyes fluttered briefly under closed lids, but he did not wake. Thomas stood near the wall, fully gowned, gloved, hair covered. It was the closest he'd been to his father in years. Inches away now, yet still suspended in a silence they had built together over time. Dr. Miles entered last, calm and steady. He offered Thomas a brief nod, not as a formality, but as permission. "You belong here. We'll numb the area locally," he explained quietly. "It won't hurt him. He might gag a little if he stirs, but we'll manage it. You don't have to stay if it's too much." "I want to," Thomas said. The nurse gently pried open Everett's mouth. Thomas instinctively held his breath, bracing for the smell. But it didn't hit like before. Not now. Not after everything. Under the examination light, the back of Everett's throat came into view. Pale tissue, reddened in places, and in the folds of the tonsils. There they were. Small, yellowish-white formations embedded in the crevices, like bits of gravel, some flat, some bulbous, some as large as sunflower seeds, others barely specks. Miles picked up a long, curved instrument. "First one," he said. He pressed gently against the lower tonsil, and a stone dislodged with a soft pop, landing on the tray with a sound far too heavy for its size. Thomas flinched. The smell surfaced, not as overwhelming as before, but enough. Pungent, earthy, foul in a way that suggested age, not death, like an old basement that had been closed for too long. Miles dropped the stone into a small specimen cup and went back in. Second one. Third. Another from the upper fold. Each time a stone came out, Thomas felt something inside him shift. Not relief, not quite sadness, something quieter, something older. By the fifth stone, his mind began to drift. He remembered his 10th birthday. His dad had made a lopsided cake, vanilla with green frosting, no candles, just a single sparkler in the middle. Thomas had loved it. He remembered a night during high school when he came home late, drunk. He'd expected a lecture, maybe a slap. Instead, he found his father waiting on the porch, silent, holding out a glass of water. No questions, just water. Stone number 8 came loose with a faint squelch. The smell pulsed again, thick and rotten. Thomas didn't move. "I never asked," he whispered, barely audible. Miles paused. "What's that?" Thomas didn't look away. "I never asked if he was okay, if he felt lonely, if something hurt," the doctor resumed. "Most sons don't." Stone 9, 10. The tray now held a small constellation of pale, hardened debris, like the fossilized remains of a story no one had told in time. Thomas remembered the Thanksgiving he left, the look on his father's face, not confusion, not anger, just that quiet letting go, like a man used to being abandoned. Another stone came free, 11. Each removal felt like peeling back a memory, a layer of distance, an unspoken apology. And still, there were more. Stone 12 was stubborn. It clung to the back of the tonsil like a secret refusing to let go. Dr. Miles adjusted the angle, pressed gently, and with a careful twist, coaxed it loose. It landed on the tray with a heavier thud than the others. Thomas stared at it. It was dark around the edges, larger, misshapen, a strange, fleshy hue, like something that had been buried too long. He felt his stomach turn, not from disgust, but from a sensation closer to grief. That one, he thought, must have been there the longest. "I think that's the oldest," Miles echoed, as if reading his mind. Thomas nodded silently. He remembered the last road trip they took. He was 15. His dad had taken him camping at Lake Crescent, just the two of them. Thomas had wanted to stay home, hang out with friends, but his mom had insisted, "Your father's trying." They'd sat by the fire, not talking much. Everett had carved something into a piece of wood. A fish, maybe. A feather. Thomas never asked. He remembered thinking then how quiet his father was, how big his hands looked in the firelight, how small the distance between them had felt, geographically, physically, but how impossible it seemed to cross. Stone 13 came next, then 14. Each one landed with a soft click, echoing louder in the silence between breaths. By the time they reached 20, Thomas had stopped flinching. Instead, he leaned in, not just physically, but emotionally. Each stone had become a symbol, not just of illness, but of time, of avoidance, of misunderstanding. His father had carried these things inside him, literally, and no one had noticed, no one had asked. 24, 25. One of the nurses gasped softly. The next stone was enormous, nearly the size of a marble. It took effort to remove, and when it came free, a foul puff of air escaped with it. Thomas didn't blink. He thought about the day he moved to Chicago. His father had helped him pack, loaded boxes into the rental van, said almost nothing. When Thomas turned to say goodbye, his father had handed him a wrench. "You'll need this. Sinks always leak." That was it. No hug, no "I'll miss you," just a wrench. At the time, Thomas had rolled his eyes. Years later, when his bathroom flooded at 2 a.m., it was the only tool that worked. Stone 26 came out with a quiet squish. The nurse dropped it into the specimen tray with visible relief. Miles leaned in for one final check. "There's one more," he murmured. Thomas held his breath. The final stone sat deeper than the rest. Half hidden, lodged at an angle, Miles worked gently, slowly. This one wouldn't be rushed. As the tool slid into place and pressure was applied, Thomas felt a strange heat behind his eyes. He remembered something small. He was sick with a fever, sweating through his pajamas, crying. His mother wasn't home. Everett had come into his room, sat on the edge of the bed, didn't say anything, just placed a cold washcloth on his forehead. Then, he stayed. All night. Never left the room, never said a word. Thomas had forgotten that moment until now. The stone came free. Miles held it up with his forceps, then dropped it into the tray. 27, he said. "That's all of them." The room fell still. Thomas stepped closer, looked down at the tray. 27 stones, hard, ugly, foul, and yet, in them, he saw years, milestones, missed conversations, dinners eaten in silence, holidays skipped, phone calls never made, all fossilized into a language his father had carried inside, waiting for someone to interpret. He whispered, "I should have asked." No one responded. They didn't need to. Dr. Miles removed his gloves. "We'll keep him under observation for the next day or two. The swelling should go down. The smell, too." Thomas nodded. But the healing had already begun, not in his father's throat, in his own. The hospital lights dimmed in the late evening, their harsh fluorescence replaced by a softer glow. The chaos of the day had settled. Machines hummed in rhythm. 4 bags swayed slightly above beds, and the smell of antiseptic had grown faint with familiarity. Thomas sat alone in his father's room. The tray of stones had been taken away. The nurses had changed the linens. Mr. Everett lay still, sedated, his breathing steadier now. His jaw had relaxed slightly. The tension in his face, the invisible shield he had worn for years, seemed to have eased just a little. Thomas sat by the window, watching the orange hue of sunset disappear behind the gray skyline. His fingers absent-mindedly rubbed the cuff of his sleeve. Then, he saw it. A folded piece of paper sticking out from the pocket of his father's flannel shirt, now draped over the chair. The shirt he always wore in winter. The one Thomas remembered pulling away from in the car, in the kitchen, on the porch. That shirt had always smelled like him, like smoke, pine, and something harder to describe. He hesitated, then reached for it. The paper was old, creased at the corners, the ink slightly faded. It wasn't sealed. No envelope, just folded in thirds, like someone had intended to mail it, and never did. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably his father's, blocky, uneven, with letters that leaned too far left in some places and stopped too soon in others. It started without a date, without a greeting, just a sentence. "I know you don't want to hear from me," Thomas swallowed. "That's okay. I just needed to say a few things somewhere, even if it's just a paper. I don't know how to talk to you the way I want to. Never learned. My dad didn't talk much either, and maybe I picked that up like a bad habit. Or maybe it's just fear. I know something's wrong, something about me, the way I smell, the way the room gets quiet when I walk in. I tried everything, mints, mouthwash, brushing so hard my gums bled. But nothing worked. So I stopped trying. Figured maybe if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't bother you as much. You used to sit closer, used to laugh with your mouth open. Now you leave the room before I finish a sentence. I'm not mad, I just miss you." Thomas blinked, tears rising without permission. He let them fall quietly onto the corner of the page. "I know I never said it enough. Maybe not at all. I love you, Tommy. Even if you never read this, even if you don't come back, I just wanted you to know." That was it. No signature, no dramatic ending, just the raw, clumsy honesty of a man who didn't know how to speak, but had finally tried, on a page he never mailed. Thomas folded the letter again with trembling fingers. He brought it to his chest and held it there, as if it were a beating heart, as if somewhere, in the space between ink and intention, his father had spoken the words out loud. The hallway outside the ICU was quiet. Just the occasional squeak of shoes on polished floors and the low hum of machines monitoring life behind closed doors. Thomas stood there for a long time, the letter folded neatly in his hand, warm now from his grip. It felt like it belonged there, like it had been waiting for him. He stepped outside into the courtyard behind the hospital. The sky was dark now, deep blue with only the faintest trace of daylight left on the horizon. A row of small trees swayed in the breeze. Somewhere someone smoked a cigarette. The smell curled toward him like memory. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts, found her name. Anna. He hadn't spoken to his wife since he landed. She had texted, "Let me know when you can." But he hadn't known what to say. Now, he did. She picked up on the second ring. "Thomas?" "Yeah. Hey. I'm here." Silence. Then relief. God, I was starting to worry. Is he? He's stable. They did a procedure today. He's still unconscious, but he's breathing on his own. That's something, she said softly. Thomas sat on the cold bench. He could hear her breathing through the line. "I found a letter," he said, "in his shirt, written to me, probably years ago." Anna didn't interrupt. He knew Anna, about the smell, about the way I pulled back. He tried to fix it, but I never asked. I just walked away. He looked down at his hand, fingers tight around the folded paper. He thought I hated him. She exhaled slowly. "You didn't." "No," he said, but I let him believe it. The wind brushed his face, crisp with early autumn. He remembered the fishing trips, the silent dinners, the old wrench in his toolbox. And suddenly, all those moments felt louder than they ever had. He was always doing things instead of saying them, Thomas said, fixing, building, showing up, but never talking. Anna's voice softened. Maybe he thought love was something you built with your hands. Thomas smiled faintly. Maybe. They sat in silence again, connected only by breath and static. Then Anna said, "What are you going to do now?" He looked up at the hospital windows, glowing in rows above him. "I'm going to stay," he said. "As long as it takes. You want me to come out there?" He shook his head, though she couldn't see it. "Not yet. I need to be with him. Just him." She didn't argue. "Okay," she said gently. "Just promise me something?" "Yeah? Don't wait until it's too late to say what you need to say." Thomas closed his eyes. "I won't." They said goodbye, and the line went dead. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and unfolded the letter again. The paper fluttered slightly in the wind, as if trying to escape. He pressed it to his chest once more, then carefully folded it and placed it in his wallet. It didn't feel like a burden. It felt like permission. He walked slowly back toward the ICU, past the vending machines, the sleepy security guard, the fading hum of the night shift settling in. As he entered the room, his eyes went to the chair beside the bed. He sat down. Not out of obligation, not because there was nothing else to do, but because, for the first time in his life, he wanted to. The morning light slipped quietly into the hospital room, filtered through the cheap vertical blinds and softened by the early autumn haze. Thomas sat in the same chair he had taken the night before, arms folded across his chest, one ankle crossed over the other. He hadn't slept much, maybe 20 minutes at most. His head leaned awkwardly against the edge of the bed. But he felt awake, not in the jittery, caffeine-fueled way of yesterday, but in a deeper sense, like every nerve in his body had been rewired overnight. The noise of the hospital faded into the background. All he could hear was the slow, steady rhythm of the heart monitor, the occasional beep of an IV drip, the rise and fall of his father's chest, still breathing. Thomas glanced at the time, 6:47 a.m. A nurse had come in earlier to check vitals, smile gently and whisper, "No change yet, but the numbers look good." He had nodded, thanked her, then gone back to waiting. His eyes scanned the room again, this time more slowly. The same blanket pulled neatly to Everett's chest, the same IV line snaking from his arm to a bag half full of clear fluid, the same plastic clip on his finger, blinking red like a tired heartbeat. Everything the same, but something felt different. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Hey," he said, voice rough from sleep. "I'm still here, Dad." No response. Of course not. But he kept talking. "I read your letter, the one you never sent." He paused. It was messy and perfect. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. Sorry I let something so small become everything." He shifted, rubbed his face with both hands. "I used to think I needed you to say something. Anything, but now I realize you already did." Silence, then something, a flicker, not a sound, not a breath, a flutter beneath closed eyelids. Thomas sat up, heart thudding. "Dad?" Nothing. Then again, a twitch, subtle, barely noticeable. Then the fingers on Everett's right hand moved, just a little. Then again. Thomas leaned in, barely breathing, and then, like the sun rising over a still lake, Everett's eyes began to open. Slow, blinking, confused, but awake. Thomas didn't speak at first. He just stared, overwhelmed. The eyes he hadn't looked into in 5 years were suddenly right there. Dull with fatigue, but unmistakably familiar. "Hey," he whispered. Everett blinked again, slowly, his lips parted, but no sound came. Thomas stood. "You're okay," he said gently. "You're here." His father's gaze locked on him now, more focused. There was no fear, no confusion, only recognition, and something else, something that sat between forgiveness and love. Thomas reached forward and took his father's hand. No gloves, no mask, no distance, just warmth. The hand was weak, but it closed around his fingers all the same. Everett didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes moved slowly, taking in the room, blinking away the haze of sedation. They settled back on Thomas, studying him like he was something remembered from a dream, vivid but fragile. Thomas gave him a gentle smile. "I'm here," he said, "and I'm not going anywhere." His father blinked again, this time slower, as if trying to say something back. His lips moved slightly, but the sound didn't come. Thomas leaned closer. "Don't try to talk, just rest. You're safe." A faint squeeze of the hand answered him. It was weak, shaky, but it was real, and it said more than any apology ever could. They sat like that for a while. No need for words. Thomas studied the lines in his father's face, the ones time had carved deeper. The gray stubble along his chin, the slight hollowing of his cheeks. He looked tired, but not broken. He looked like someone who had waited a long time. Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter. He unfolded it quietly, smoothing the creases with his thumb. "I found this," he said softly. "In your shirt." Everett's eyes dropped to the paper, then back up to his son's face. "I read it," Thomas continued. "Every word." His voice cracked. "And I'm sorry. For not coming back sooner. For not asking. For staying away." The monitor beeped steadily beside them, unfazed by the emotional surgery happening in the room. "I thought you didn't care," Thomas said. "Thought you were just cold, distant." But you weren't. You were hurting, and I didn't see it." Everett's eyes shimmered, and for a second, Thomas thought he might cry. But no tear came, just that look, so raw, so open, so unguarded, that Thomas had never seen before. It shattered him. "I'm not leaving," he said again, firmer now. "Not this time." His father's hand twitched once more, this time curling tighter around Thomas's fingers, like holding on, like anchoring. Thomas sat back slightly, never letting go. The silence between them, once so wide and echoing, had become something else entirely. A quiet that healed instead of hurt. A silence that spoke of peace. He remembered being a boy, waking from nightmares, stumbling down the hallway in the dark. He'd stand in the doorway of his parents' room, too proud to cry but too scared to go back to bed, and there was always his father, already sitting up. "Come on," he'd say, lifting the blanket without question. Not a single lecture, not a single demand, just presence. And now, decades later, Thomas offered the same thing. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's start over." No response, but no resistance either. Thomas stayed the rest of the day, read out loud from a magazine someone had left behind, adjusted the blinds when the sun moved too high, helped a nurse fix the pillow behind Everett's head. He didn't look at his phone, didn't check email. For the first time in a long while, nothing outside that room seemed urgent. In the early evening, when the nurse came in to adjust the IV drip, Thomas stood and stretched his back. "I'm going to grab some coffee," he said gently. "You okay for a bit?" His father blinked once, slow, intentional. Thomas smiled. "I'll be right back." He hesitated at the door, turned around. Everett was watching him, not out of fear he'd disappear, but simply watching, like a man who no longer needed to ask for anything, because for once what he needed had already arrived. It had been 32 days since Everett came home. Thomas knew the number without checking. He didn't need a calendar to count. Every morning had its own weight now. Each day began with the same ritual, the sound of the kettle warming on the stove, the shuffle of slippers on old wood floors, and the smell of something cooking. Not fancy, not perfect, but warm. This morning it was eggs. He stood in the kitchen, spatula in hand, flipping the third one onto a chipped plate. He wasn't much of a cook, but he'd learned quickly. His dad didn't eat much these days, appetite still recovering, but Thomas made breakfast anyway, every single day. In the living room, Everett sat in the recliner, same one he'd used for decades. But now, instead of staring at a blank TV, he looked out the window. The flannel shirt was back but freshly laundered. The sun fell across his lap in soft golden stripes. "You ready to eat?" Thomas called from the kitchen. Everett didn't answer. He never did, not in words. But a beat later, he stood slowly, with the help of the cane they'd bought, together 2 weeks ago, and made his way toward the kitchen table. Thomas laid the plate down. Toast, eggs, a little bit of fruit on the side. Nothing fancy, but it was hot, made with intention. They sat together, facing each other. No TV, no newspaper, just food. And for a while the only sound was the soft scrape of fork against plate. Then Thomas did something he hadn't done in years. He laughed. Not loudly, not forced, just a soft, amused chuckle that came out when Everett tried to butter his toast with the wrong end of the knife. "Still got your tricks," Thomas said. Everett smirked, barely, but it was there. His face was thinner now, but not lifeless. His eyes held more light than they had in years. Thomas took a sip of coffee. "You remember when you used to burn the toast on purpose?" he said. "Told me it was extra flavor. I believed you until I was 16. Everett shrugged one shoulder. Thomas smiled. Then, more quietly, "It's good to have you back." Everett met his eyes, and in that look, there was no tension, no shadow, just recognition. Thomas took a slow breath. The house smelled different now, not antiseptic, not sour, no longer a place of quiet decay. It smelled like butter and toast, a little bit of coffee, a hint of laundry soap. It smelled like life. They didn't plan the trip, it just happened. One Saturday morning, Everett said, "Let's go somewhere." It wasn't a demand, not even a request, more like a suggestion tossed into the air between bites of scrambled eggs. Thomas looked up. "Anywhere in mind?" "Lake Crescent," Everett said. "If you don't mind the drive." Thomas didn't. They packed light, blanket, sandwiches, a thermos of coffee, and Everett's old fishing hat, worn thin around the edges. The drive took 2 hours, winding through pine forests and roadside diners. They didn't talk much, but the silence had changed. It no longer pressed down on them, it breathed. By noon they reached the lake. It was exactly as Thomas remembered, still, vast, framed by green hills. The dock had aged. The picnic benches looked the same. Even the old wooden sign, carved with names and initials, stood stubbornly in the same spot. They found a patch of grass near the water. Thomas helped his father down slowly, laying out the blanket. They sat together, side by side, eating in the quiet. Ducks glided past. Children laughed in the distance. Somewhere nearby, a guitar played softly through an open car window. After a while, Everett pulled something from his jacket pocket. Not a letter this time, just a folded photo. He handed it to Thomas without a word. It was a picture from years ago. Thomas as a boy, maybe 6, holding up a makeshift raft made of milk jugs and duct tape. Everett stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling. Thomas traced the edge of the photo with his thumb. "I remember this day," he said. "You let me ride that thing all the way out to the buoy." "You nearly tipped," Everett replied. "I thought I was invincible." "You were." They shared a quiet laugh. Thomas turned the photo over. On the back, in faded ink, were 5 words. He built it himself. "Proud." Thomas looked up, eyes stinging. "You never showed me this." "Didn't think you'd care." "I care," Thomas said. "I care about all of it." Everett nodded slowly. His voice was softer now. "I used to write letters in my head," he said. "After you left, every day, but they never made it to paper." Thomas didn't speak. He couldn't. "I thought maybe if I wrote them down, it would feel real, but it hurt too much, so I just held them." Thomas placed the photo in his shirt pocket. "I think I heard them anyway," he said. They sat in silence again, but it was the kind of silence you hold like a gift, like a shared song without lyrics. Eventually, Everett leaned back, eyes closed, the sun warm on his face. Thomas looked out at the lake. For a long time, he had run from that smell, from the weight of it, the shame of it. But now he understood. It hadn't just been about breath or bacteria. It had been about neglect, about loneliness calcified into something physical, about all the things they didn't say, and now they were saying them, without speaking. "I'm glad you waited," Thomas said quietly. Everett opened his eyes. "I wasn't going to," he said. "But something told me to hold on." Thomas nodded. "You did. And I'm here now." Everett reached over and placed a weathered hand on his son's. The sun shifted behind a cloud, casting ripples of light across the lake. The smell in the air wasn't of antiseptic or rot. It was of pine needles, coffee, sun-warmed grass, and something else. Something harder to name, but easier to feel. It smelled like forgiveness. It smelled like love. Sometimes the things that push us apart aren't arguments, or betrayal, or loss. Sometimes it's something as small and as powerful as silence, as a smell left unexplained, as a hand never held. But healing doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with staying, with sitting beside someone long enough to understand the quiet they've been living in. It starts with asking and not walking away. As Thomas and his father sat by the lake, with nothing but sunlight, old memories, and the sound of water between them, there was no apology, no perfect speech, just presence. And sometimes that's enough. Have you ever left something unsaid, or wished you'd asked the question before it was too late? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll subscribe, not just for more stories like this, but because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear it too. And your click might help it find them. Until next time, I'm Dr. Late Life. And I believe sometimes medicine heals the body, but stories, they heal the heart.